So I guess within the context of what we've been talking about, using transportation hubs as an example, as a group we got together and said, look, there's some really interesting points that we want to discuss here, and as we go around the panel, I'll just ask you if you could each briefly introduce yourselves to the audience. The first discussion comes back to how can data-driven solutions and analytics be utilised to inform policy and government decision making, which is a really important one. We've talked about having a lot of data at our disposal and being able to take actions as an operator, but in terms of, like we've said, sustainability, which is the theme of today. Dan, your organisation, Valmont's moving strongly now into the technology, smart city sort of space, and you operate at a very high level in your organisation. How do you see the steps that you're going to be taking and the data and information that we can develop for airport applications now being used collaboratively with government to drive that policy decision-making aspect?
Well, thank you. At Valmont, our theme and our tagline has been conserving resources, improving life. And this is long before ESG or any of that stuff was out there. We're in the infrastructure business. So we are a proud manufacturer. We bend metal. We have welders on our staff. But as an industrial tech company, we are making infrastructure smarter. So that's key, that's critical. Because we can talk bits and bytes and killer apps and hardware, things like that, but the focus really needs to be on outcomes. Talk about the outcomes. And you stole my thunder because my favorite word is interoperability. We talk to CTOs at cities. They have 3,000 systems. So I can't walk in and say, hey, would you like your 3,001st? They want to say, how can you make your infrastructure feed my existing ecosystem? Because cities do have all these systems, and we need to support that. So that's really our approach, is making infrastructure smarter.
We were having a brief discussion at lunch, Larry, about the situation in Turkey with the earthquake and with what you're doing as an organisation. My discussions with the Mayor of Istanbul the other day, who has 100,000 at-risk buildings, one of them turned to a piece of legislation now. I'm not sure if you would have seen people were trapped in buildings for days or until they died. And one of the first things that happened during the earthquake was that all of the electrical infrastructure went down, all of the mobile connectivity stopped, and so temporary phone towers were brought in. But if you weren't a Turkey Telecom customer, even though your phone was there and you wanted to ring someone and say you're alive, you were a Vodafone user, you could not communicate, right? So there's a case in point where something like you're doing, which I'd defer to as well, where you need light and you need connectivity, is going to be a critical element that'll enable a legislation to for example, provide cross-carrier connectivity right away. So in terms of, and it's something that the government there is really, really interested in what you're doing now, because they realise that a critical part of resilience and sustainability is going to be around having that sort of connectivity and having, illumination and these things in those sorts of emergency situations. So where do you sit as an individual and organisation in terms of that policy discussion, and how do you frame your innovation and your technology to try and meet those challenges?
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Larry Tittle. I'm the founder, CEO of Clearworld. I created a very unique, aesthetically pleasing solar wrap that goes around existing or new infrastructure. Really, it's a big picture perspective here, which a lot of folks don't really understand or realize what we're now entering. So it is redundant, resilient power is what it equates to. It's sustainable lives, it's just sustainable infrastructure, transportation. And so, I created a smart pole, and this smart pole actually connects everything together. So it's the roadways, it's the veins in your body that are the roadways that are talking to the drones, to the autonomous vehicles, and to the pedestrians. But the problem with all this is when the grid goes down and you don't have battery storage and you don't have solar, you don't have anything. You don't have communications. You don't have emergency evacuation routes. You don't have anything. And so a city is a living, breathing organism, and it's us. It's all inclusive. So, what we have to do as a society is we have to transparently have platforms and communicate and put policies in place where everybody is involved. It's the citizens, it's the politicians, it's the community engagement, it's collaboration. It's a much bigger picture that we all have to work together to achieve.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things on that topic, again, talking last week in Brisbane, and we've touched on machine learning and artificial intelligence during the day, but there's been these big punctuation points in history where we've created technology so powerful we've had to stop and form an ethical framework around it. So when Oppenheimer, first saw the bomb go off, I think everyone realised there was a whole lot more to nuclear energy than anyone could ever have conceived of. It took from 44 to 67 to get the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, right? 23 years before we could form an ethical framework, and even then, four of the 9 nuclear-capable countries on the planet haven't signed up to it. So the next one was when we mapped the human genome, and suddenly you could clone your children, or you could harvest organs and do all of these sorts of things. We had to stop and create an ethical framework, and I think we're at that point where the power of artificial intelligence, the power of machine learning has fallen into the public domain now, and we're going to need to form an ethical framework. There's a couple of schools of thought. Costas, who's on the airport panel, sent me an image the other day of, in the 60s, teachers striking in Washington, D.C. in protest to calculators being distributed to students. And there's sort of a theme around chat GPT with that at the moment. But Leon, to come across to you, you're somebody who's working in platforms and data and analytics. How do you see the balance between the potential of what you can do with that information and the tools that you're creating and working with, and how we can build an ethical framework that balances, things that we want, like safety and security and better health and more efficient assets, versus the privacy that a lot of people are worried about. You deal with enormous amounts of data. How do you see that?
Hi, everyone. In case you haven't figured it out, I'm the second Australian on the panel, but I'm a New Yorker as of 2 weeks ago. The accent just hasn't quite caught up to me yet.
Give it another week.
Yeah. All right, I'm not going to do a New York accent. All right. I'm the founder of Bueno. We've been around for 10 years. We do data analytics software and fault detection software for the built environment. So we kind of operate on the other side of the smart building envelope.
Do you want to just put your microphone a bit closer?
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
So, we're really in touch with everything that goes on within a smart building. And I guess, like Corey was saying earlier today, that the building blocks of smart cities are really smart buildings. We're in a pretty fortunate position in that not much of the data that we collect is, personally identifiable information. We'd be able to tell you what temperature this room is, how fast the fans are running, how open the dampers are, and that kind of thing. But we're in a pretty innocuous position when it comes to ethical use of the data that we're collecting, and risk, which makes me feel a lot more comfortable. But the interesting kind of ethical concern for us is that our software really automates a lot of rotational checks that are otherwise being done by technicians, being done by engineering consultants, the people that are bending the steel and that kind of thing. So there is some ethical concerns around automation, but in the space that we're in, there's variously estimated somewhere between a shortage of 80,000 and 110,000 mechanical services technicians just in the US alone. So I think it's kind of lucky that we're able to deliver this capability into the industry right now, because without technology like ours, you won't be able to meet these kind of increasing expectations and demands around improved indoor environment quality, reduced carbon emissions and energy efficiency, and just generally increased performance from the built environment.
Would you, this came up again in a discussion the other day, but we're living at the moment in terms of sustainability in a world where 6 generations of momentum since the top of the Industrial Revolution have got us going in a certain direction at a certain pace, and obviously America and the UK and Germany were instrumental in bringing about the Industrial Revolution and the changes that it brings. One thing that came up was that we're very fortunate that now with some of these tools and technologies we've created, we've got an ability to throw the brakes out and change direction faster than we could have, maybe 15 or 20 years ago. And I think it's not lost on anybody that we need to move at pace and innovate around that. So that sort of comes back to that point of balancing how quickly we can move. We do face a transgenerational challenge around sustainability, and the fact that that's uncoupled with electoral cycles that are much shorter and that have their own imperatives can be a challenge. And it'd be a good question, I guess, for public sector to sort of how to marry the imperatives of government and being elected to set policies with the speed with which we've got to move, I guess, around in sustainable change. So one other point of discussion, I guess, and we might throw it over to everybody, is in terms of this sustainability now, artificial intelligence, decision intelligence, machine learning. As an organisation, like I said, we want to democratise the sort of knowledge and use cases that we have, make them available to government and collaborate. What are the areas that each of you are working in at the moment where you're seeing data and technology really being able to contribute towards that sustainable transformation? And yes, give us as much detail as you like, because going forward we want to be able to pick these use cases up and share them, as I said, with clients and government to be able to build playbooks like airports or build what each of you are doing into these solutions. Do you want to have a go at that, Dan?
Yeah, we just talked about transportation in the last panel, in the context of airports, but think about highway systems. So we manufacture the light poles, of course, but we've deployed air quality systems and measurements, to get microclimate at a 5-kilometer type area. That's great. We publish it for air quality. Let's say your child has asthma, hey, maybe that's not a good day to go out to recess. That's one use case for air quality. Think about a transportation management system, though. Let's say you have a high concentration of CO2, particulates, things like that. Cars idling. If you're trying to manage for sustainability, for environmental impact, you can take that same data, feed it through an API to a TMS system, and actually redirect traffic based on the environmental conditions. So it's a good example of sustainability. It's a dual use case for one data point. We talked about the AWS system. I'm really interested in learning more about that, because that's a way to throw out a piece of data and then for dual uses or tri-uses, do a lot with just one single point.
One of the things that's of interest is how you can share cross-agency and cross-organisational data. And there's a project that we were looking at a few years ago with Orange County at Smart City Council, and to be able to do traffic analytics, it involved data from 78 different cities, counties, state, federal agencies and organisations, right? So until you can build a common, let's call it a civic data trust with a set of physical and operational rules around it, sometimes we can't quite leverage the value that we want to create. But Larry, where are you seeing at the moment in what you're doing really strong value propositions out of the steps forward you're taking in the sort of technology enablement that you've got?
Yes, we're actually seeing a lot. We have a contract recently with EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute, with the California Energy Commission, like 8 sites going to the large utilities in California as pilots to test smart sensors, smart lights, push and pull power. They have an issue. They have a duck curve in California, as we all know. So that's one use case where it draws the attention from some of our other utility partners in the industry. It is adopting. It's adopting quick. Earlier in the discussion, we talked about the funding, CARES Act funding. Well, the federal government brought some money down to the state of Texas and then out to the city of Dallas. Well, we did a project using CARES Act funding for schools, libraries, universities, community centers, residential areas all over Dallas for remote learning and work, providing Wi-Fi, right? So there's a lot of use cases, and even smart transportation. Imagine the way it will be as all of these light poles will be connected and everything will be talking to each other, whereas all of this data at the edge has to compute because of the latency prior to going to the cloud. And so all of that information has to be real time. So you have to create a case that everybody can win in what you're trying to achieve, the goals you're trying to achieve. So it's really a big deal, but I think it all comes down to a collaboration between public-private sector, the P3s the buzzwords that we always hear. It is happening. They are coming together. It is becoming inclusive for all. So socially, whether it's programs that the citizens and the municipal want to put in place for folks that may be suffering or need some added help through community services or whatever the case may be, it's bringing that digital divide together, again, where everybody can win.
Thanks for that. And Leon, I guess where are you looking at going forward at the moment in terms of next steps and opportunities to iterate and enhance the sorts of solutions that you're working with?
Yeah, sure. So I'll do my use case.
Yeah.
So we have a really great client in Australia. They're a company called Woolworths. They're a retailer, a grocery chain. In Australia, we call them Woolies. So excuse me if I interchangeably refer to them as Woolies while I'm explaining this use case. They are the 20th biggest retailer in the world. They have about 1,084 supermarkets. In those supermarkets, they have about 140,000 assets that are related to refrigeration, air conditioning, those kinds of different uses. We're connected to about 1.5 million individual sensors with our software across that client. And they are responsible for more than 1% of Australia's energy consumption. So they're a big, through working with these guys, these folks, we can really kind of move the needle in terms of environmental benefit. So their energy spend is, of the order of, when we started, about $500 million a year. And now it's 27% less. So that's pretty impressive. And how have we done that? Well, it has been by taking, leveraging the value in the data set that they're sitting on. There's a whole bunch of different use cases around how do they better direct limited capital budgets in order to get the best bang for buck when they're upgrading their grocery stores. How do they automate a lot of these maintenance checks that might otherwise happen rotationally every month, and then instead do them continuously? There was a single specific use case. They wanted to. One of their strategic goals was to reduce their refrigerant use by 15%. We got there by developing 2 algorithms that scanned through their data and early identified refrigerant leaks in their equipment. Those 2 algorithms saved them $4 million a year and helped them get to that 15% refrigerant use saving. And as you know, refrigerant has a huge global warming potential. So what was really interesting was taking it back to all of these kind of processes which were already happening day in and day out, and then just looking at, now that you're able to access these kind of machine-generated data a lot more easily, find ways to enhance existing processes.
And another one, I guess, to talk about with sustainability is there's a few different aspects of it. There's the lighting, there's refrigeration, mechanical services, water waste. Then there's also the embedded energy cost, obviously. If you've got people driving trucks out all the time and service technicians, and I'm aware that you and Scott with fire safety technology are working on a project with a company I'm involved with. $1 million a year of false alarms as a supermarket. That's a tremendous amount of trucks driving up and down the street to attend something, a call out for no purpose. Over and above the money, just you know, the embedded energy of all of those trucks and the fuel and all of these sorts of things is the sort of the other aspect around sustainability.
Yeah, consumables, you know, in terms of chemicals that you might use in water treatment, for example, there's a lot of, like, yeah, you're exactly right, that there's a lot of embodied environmental cost in maintenance being done inefficiently.
And I think we're uniquely positioned at the moment with the labour shortage and the material shortage we have in the world to use technology to innovate, because we're not taking jobs away from the labour market, we're actually filling a very necessary gap, particularly with things around life safety. There's an incredible statistic out of the state of New South Wales in my country that 98% of deployments of firefighting units are for false alarms. So on the flip side of that, when I was in Ireland talking to the head of the European Firefighters Union and talked about a technology that could prevent these false alarms, he said, I don't think we'd support that. That wouldn't be good for business, right? We're a union here, and we don't want people not driving around doing that. We want to be getting cats out of trees and turning up to false alarms. So